pretty scary. It was pretty scary. And then again, my H. pylori flared up. They put me on medication, and that time, that antibiotic treatment, I ended up with hives from my shoulders all the way down to my feet, like big blotches of hives. Itchy. It was horrible. And I had to finish the antibiotic treatment, but I knew from that point on, I have to do something different because I can't take this anymore. Like, I don't want to go through this. And that's when I started researching on what is H. pylori. They would tell me I can't really reverse it. I'll always have it. I was like, is that true? And around that time was when Jonathan was just starting to work with The Truth About Cancer, doing docuseries on health. He was the one that was editing all of it. He was there with us, and I was actually very pessimistic. I would think more standard about treatments, and I was like, of course, we're going to take vaccines. Of course, we're going to do this. Whatever the doctor tells me, we're going to do. But at the same time, I was also very jaded. I was just like, nothing's working. I'm taking all your medications. You can't answer my questions. All they can tell me, oh, you have irritable bowel syndrome. And you have to take these horrible antibiotics that at the end, I can't even take anymore. So it forced me to look outside of the box, and I started just researching. And I learned about spirochetes, and I learned about, the H. pylori bacteria. And so that started opening my mind. And then going back to Jonathan would be editing all these testimonials, all these experts' interviews. And, when you edit, you hear the same lines over and over and over again. He didn't have his own office. He was like in the living room. So he just wouldn't argue with me. He'd just keep going. And at that point, I was like, okay, if they have something that I need to learn more. So little by little, I just started implementing things here and there. We finally met. I had my blood test that I'd taken at the functional medicine doctor, and we met a doctor friend of ours, and he basically told me that look, you have red flags for parasites. And I was again offended and grossed out. And I was just like, no, you can't tell me this again. But I was desperate. Like, I had tried everything, spent so much money. At that point, it was like, but we were willing to do anything and everything to try it out. And so I was like, okay, just at least tell me that the parasites are going to come out dead. And he was like, yeah, they will. So I was dreading the day that those pills, or whatever you call them, those pills came home. But I started taking them, and that's when, it took about a month, and then I started passing parasites, and that was the beginning of my healing. Basically, after 3 months, some of the relief of my symptoms were that day. Like, my chronic pain on my ribs, my left side, gone. And then within a couple weeks, I started to be able to eat things that I could never really eat before. I was trying ththings out, things that I would end up in bed with pain, gone. I didn't have that problem. And I remember the first day that I released the Kraken, released the parasite. I remember I was in the shower, and I felt like this big, massive burden was lifted up. Like, my body felt light for the first time ever in my life. I didn't know that I could actually ever feel this way. I'm like, I feel lighter, but I don't know from what. But now looking back, it's like I felt like I had lead in my body. Like, it was really heavy. And for the first time, I felt like I can't even explain to you the feeling of relief. And so the fear of parasites coming out of me turned into, okay, these suckers are going to die. And the war is on. And from there, I was just getting so much, within weeks, symptoms were going away. I had no more migraines. I had no more, I could eat. So within 3 months, I basically reversed all the symptoms that I had since I was 13. And I even took blood tests and everything, and it was showing clear, I didn't tell them I had H. pylori, but it didn't show up anymore. anemia, all that stuff. I didn't get shaky. My body was like super quiet. I can't explain. Like, it was just, and the energy was insane. Like, I could actually feel like I could function for the first time. I could catch up with people. I could, it was just incredible how much energy I had. I remember at nighttime when I was just like, I could not deal. I was like, wow, I'm still going. And I was happy. I was like, it had like a clear brain, like happy, excited, talkative, things that I normally didn't do growing up, kind of thing. So it was incredible. And I still kept passing parasites 3 months after that. So for a total of 6 months. And then right before I finished, I think it was like getting down to the end, I found out I was pregnant. And that was something that silently we had no idea. We were both fearing, but we were both fearing that we couldn't get pregnant. It was like we weren't trying, but at the same time we weren't stopping it either. And it was like, okay, wait a second, like there's something wrong here. And we were both silently, fearing it, but because we were struggling enough, we just didn't talk about it. And when we started talking about it, it was like, wow, yeah, we were actually, think there was a suspicion that I was having struggles even falling pregnant. And then next thing you know, boom, like we were pregnant. Like I said, I was offended. I was like, you are not going to, what, like parasites coming out of me? No, I can't even, like, please don't talk to me about this. Like, I was like, no, not going there. I was one of the first that would be like, ew, that's so gross. And also I had heard horror stories of my mother having live parasites and all the horror stories you hear, and like maybe YouTube videos you accidentally watched. I can't even watch that stuff. Like, just the thought of that grossed me out. And to think, and I think I remember my good doctor friend, he literally told me, he's like, well, better out than in. And I was like, yeah, that is true. That is true. I became a billboard for like, you got to remove your parasites after that, right? And people just like, nope, I'd rather keep them inside. I was like, you have no idea I felt that way, but it wasn't until I literally, like, the parasite came out. First of all, like, it was nothing, like, it was like going to the bathroom normally. And it just felt a little, I don't know how to explain it. I have to, like, transparency, like, it felt longer than normal. Whatever was coming out just felt longer than normal, but it just felt normal, like going to the bathroom. And then you look down and you're like, what the heck is that? I was a little grossed out, but at the end of the day, immediately what I felt, that relief in my body, and what came after that with, continuing to purge out, it was like the war's on. Like, this does not compare. What I'm feeling right now does not compare to me wanting to keep those nasty critters inside. You guys are done. And I will do whatever it takes to get you out of my body. I want you out. Like, that's, first of all, why would you want those ugly things inside of you? And two, it was literally stealing my life force. Three, I felt horrible for all these years, and finally, instantly, like, I'm feeling amazing, in a way that I've never, ever, ever felt in my life, that I knew that I could feel. Imagine feeling like this weight is lifted off that you knew you didn't have, like you didn't know that you had, like, but then you still always felt heavy and tired and sluggish. Yeah, because that parasite is literally stealing your life force, binding to all the toxins and junk, and like keeping you down. Like, why would you want that? So I don't know. I just can't explain it. All I know is immediately with that energy that I actually had for the first time, I was like, war's on, and I started doing everything possible to feed myself things that killed them. Not made them thrive. Like, I was going to thrive now. They were done. I was going to start thriving. And so I started learning about pumpkin seeds and being vegetarian at the time because they love their meat. And for me, I loved eating meat. I was a carnivore. My dad and I loved our steaks with big cups of cow's milk. And and I could have never imagined a life where I would not be eating those things, but feeling the relief that I had for the first time that I could actually feel this way and have this hope that I never thought I could have. You can't, there's no price to that. Like, you can't compare. So.
Hey, it's Jonathan Otto, and welcome to episode 7 of Healing Genesis, Healing from Within, the unbreakable link between the gut and healthy living. Your gut is a crucial part of your immune system. It's a home to trillions of bacteria in the body that play a crucial role in immune function. Around 80% of your immune system is found in the gut, and by keeping it healthy and clean, your immune system gets stronger and more efficient in fending off any kind of disease. The standard American diet, or SAD, is a diet high in foods that have a negative impact on the gut microbiome by decreasing beneficial bacteria and increasing harmful bacteria. In this episode, we'll be deep diving into the unbreakable link between the gut and healthy living, toxic food that you should be absolutely avoiding consuming, and plant-based superfoods that should be a part of your everyday diet. Kicking off this episode, we have Dr. Stephanie Seneff as she shares some intriguing insights into detoxing from glyphosate, the controversial herbicide. She recommends substances like fulvic acid and humic acid, which could potentially bind to glyphosate, facilitating its elimination through feces. What's fascinating is the idea that these substances might even host advanced enzymes capable of breaking down various molecules, including glyphosate. Now, when it comes to breaking down glyphosate, Dr. Seneff explores the use of substances like superoxide, hydrogen peroxide, or chlorine dioxide. However, she explains that these treatments are somewhat controversial, especially chlorine dioxide, which might not be openly discussed in mainstream circles due to its association with chlorine. Dr. Seneff, I do want to ask you before I let you go about what you know about ways to use tools available to us, herbs and other substances, minerals, to help cleanse the gut, the body, from these toxins, from glyphosate. I'd like to hear what you think.
Fulvic acid and humic acid have both been recommended for glyphosate cleansing, to bind to the glyphosate and carry it out through the feces, or even perhaps to be harboring very sophisticated enzymes that have a diverse capability to break down lots of different molecules that might even be able to break down the glyphosate, which is what I always look for. If you just release it in the feces, it's still around. It hasn't gone away. Whereas if you can get a microbe that can break it down, or an enzyme that can break it down, or even a substance that can break it down, such as superoxide, so hydrogen peroxide, or chlorine dioxide, and these are both sort of controversial treatments that some people are promoting. Chlorine dioxide is quite interesting, and I have people who believe that it's helpful for autism. It's kind of a third rail as far as mentioning it in the mainstream, because they associate it with chlorine. It's had some really miraculous effects, including on COVID-19. And there's a documentary that gives a lot of examples of people who benefited from chlorine dioxide in very small doses, taken several times a day. I will give a shout out for Carrie Rivera, who's the mother of an autistic son who spent apparently like $1 million trying to repair her child of its autism, and did finally discover chlorine dioxide and found it was effective. And then she became a practitioner. She treats people around the world with this sort of small dose chlorine dioxide, plus some other supplements, including sulfur-containing supplements. I'm a big fan of sulfur. I think having sufficient sulfur in your body is important for being able to detox a lot of things. As I mentioned, sulfation of mercury, for example, sulfation of p-cresol. These are ways that the liver detoxes these fat-soluble chemicals. And in my book, I talk a lot about the sulfation pathway and how it gets disrupted by glyphosate. I think sulfate plays a critical role in autism, sulfate deficiency, which is maybe primarily a consequence of the disruption of the enzymes involved in sulfate metabolism by glyphosate, because many of the enzymes that are involved with managing sulfur have what I call a glyphosate susceptibility motif, that they would be predicted to be strongly affected, badly affected by glyphosate. So sulfur, eating sulfur-containing foods, garlic, I'm a big fan of garlic. it can help you. It helps strengthen your immune system. And I think strengthening your immune system is really a very important thing to do, both for the virus and for the vaccine and for the glyphosate, just to get your immune system to be able to work properly, to allow you to clear garbage, to get rid of toxins and to detoxify and to keep your body healthy.
I know you were in the sulfates, which is profound. Sulfur or black Himalayan pink salt.
Right. That's very good. Yes, and you can also drink water that has sulfur in it. So it's volcanic water sourced from volcanic areas is like Pellegrino, for example, is high in sulfur. So that water can become useful as a sulfur supplement. And then, of course, I also promote probiotics, and not just because you need to renew your gut microbes, but also because there could be among those probiotics certain species that can metabolize glyphosate. So chlorine dioxide and hydrogen peroxide can break it down non-enzymatically, but enzymes, certain bacteria have enzymes that can break it down enzymatically, which is much more powerful. But only a few bacteria are able to break down glyphosate because it has a nasty CP bond that most enzymes are stuck. They don't know how to deal with the CP bond. So there's only a few enzymes that can break down glyphosate. There's only a few microbes that have those enzymes. But one is certain species of Acetobacter, and Acetobacter are common in probiotics. So I could hope that by eating, for example, vinegar or apple cider vinegar or sauerkraut, you could be getting microbes that can break down glyphosate.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Coming back to this mechanism behind fulvic and humic, there's a particular molecule structure with humic and fulvic. Are you very familiar with how it works on a cellular level?
Well, I know it's a very complex sugar compound. It's kind of like the glycocalyx, actually. It has very complicated molecules that are large molecules with a carbon structure.
I think so. You're often going to know a lot of different things because of your mind on something, and I know certain things, and kind of that's kind of the value sometimes of us just putting our heads together. The way I understand that it works is it has a very low molecular weight, and it's able to deposit nutrients into cells.
Yeah, so it has a lot of holes, right? Because it's a big complicated thing with a lot of holes, and that allows to trap things. And one of the things it can trap is enzymes. That's why I think, because it's in the soil, and the enzymes that are released by the microbes in the soil could get trapped in this structure, the humic acid. And then those enzymes could be available when you take the humic acid. You're also taking those enzymes, and the enzymes can potentially break down glyphosate.
I had seen it anecdotally from people reporting that without me even seeing any advertising for that, and then I was like, okay, wow, so you couldn't heal the leaky gut until you got this. You started using high quality humic and fulvic, because people can actually even buy fulvic and it doesn't actually have fulvic in it, because you have to know how much fulvic is in there. Just because it says fulvic doesn't mean that it actually is high in fulvic, or it actually has a high presence of fulvic. That's kind of the interesting aspect.
That's another problem, isn't it? There's so much issue in quality control. I think that's something people need to worry about with supplements, especially. I eat only when I buy food at the grocery store. I always look for the certified organic label. That's a way you can avoid glyphosate in your food. Really cut way back on your glyphosate in your food. But when people take supplements, they don't usually worry about its source, whether it's organic, whether it's natural. I think those are important issues you need to consider. Even when you're taking a vitamin, is it a synthetic vitamin or a natural vitamin? I think it matters.
Yeah, well, no, this is such a good point. And so then the high mineral density as well. So in fulvic, you've got 71 minerals.
Right, it's a lot of minerals.
13 organic acids, 18 amino acids. So you've got over 100 micronutrients. And so, okay, this one I would love to know if I've got it right. Do they interact, for example, like if you have 71 minerals, there's a lot of dense minerals in there. Do they interact with other dense minerals in the body, or heavy metals even? Is that part of the reason why they do like attract like, for example? Do do they connect? For example, you have a strange thing in humic and fulvic. You have organic, or when I say organic, naturally occurring in nature, aluminum, plant aluminum, and you have sea fluoride, which is very strange to think about fluoride as positive in this case, but it's sea fluoride. It's naturally occurring. And same with the natural plant aluminum. I've believed that these are actually corresponding and binding to the synthetic ones because of the like attracting like. I'm just curious if you know anything on that kind of mechanism, how that things work in that nature.
Certainly the minerals do interact with each other, and in fact they substitute for each other. One of the concerns I have is if you're taking a lot of zinc, you can actually mess up your copper. So these things sort of work coordinated. I like to think if you're taking a supplement, it needs to be something natural like sea salt, which will have a lot of different minerals in it, but a balanced amount of the different ones. So if you take a pure mineral like zinc, you could be breaking your zinc-copper balance such that the zinc ends up substituting for copper and causing trouble. So all the minerals are really delicate. You really want to have the right amount of all of them. And we have a general deficiency problem because they've been so depleted from our soil. Glyphosate disrupts the uptake of minerals into plants. And so Don Huber showed tremendous drop in the levels of copper and zinc and manganese, magnesium, all these different minerals. Sulfur, in fact, sulfur was very low in plants that were exposed to glyphosate. So the glyphosate is disrupting the ability of the plant to absorb the minerals, which then means when you eat the glyphosate-contaminated food, you're getting mineral deficiency. And you can take a supplement, but if you take a supplement that's a single mineral, you have the danger of disturbing your balance with the other minerals that you're not taking. So it's quite complicated to know exactly how to handle that. They interact for sure, and they can disrupt each other.
Next, we have Dr. Kathleen Geringer, as she shares the importance of detoxification, emphasizing the need to remove toxins, parasites, and heavy metals from the body. She draws our attention to the significance of repairing the gut with proper nutrients to prevent the growth of harmful substances. Dr. Geringer mentions that detoxing can be necessary for various reasons, including lifestyle choices, alcohol or medication use, and weight loss. She also tells us of the role of digestive enzymes in breaking down food for nutrient absorption and suggests the use of fulvic and humic acid to aid in detoxification and support kidney and liver function. Following that, we have Dr. Philip McMillan, who discusses the intricacies of long COVID, recognizing the effectiveness of diverse therapies for individuals. Emphasizing the dysregulation of the T-cell immune system, Dr. McMillan tackles toxins, suggesting a focus on gut-related aspects. Managing symptoms is vital, but not a long-term fix. Dr. McMillan explains that to achieve lasting improvement, individuals must prioritize gut health and avoid immune response triggers in their lifestyle.
I think everybody needs to go through a detox, several times a year, depending on their severity. It's so important for us to relay down a new gut flora. But first, we have to eliminate the toxins. First, we have to remove all the toxins out of the body, like the parasites, and just remove the heavy metals. And what we want to do is that we want to repair the gut by putting it proper nutrients, laying down really good soil so all the bad stuff don't grow. So what we want to do is eliminate, and then we want to re-inoculate, put that good stuff back into the body, and making sure that the body functions normally and naturally, because everything starts out in our gut.
It makes a lot of sense. And then how do you feel like that detox aspect goes together with using probiotics and gut healing, supporting the heart, multivitamins? How do you feel like those go together, detox with the gut healing, with the multivitamins?
So when we talk about detoxing, it can be detoxing from things, our lifestyle, and it can be detoxing from alcohol or medication, or even detoxing from weight loss. A lot of times when we lose weight, our fat cell shrinks, and when the fat cell shrinks, what it does is that it releases a lot of toxins. And to prevent rebound weight gain, you have to get rid of those toxins, because the toxins is what's going to cause the inflammation in the body. So first, get rid of the toxins, and then what we want to do is that we want to repair our gut The reason we become toxic, the reason we become ill and sick is because our body's overloaded with these toxins. So we have to remove them. And incorporating digestive enzymes helps the body break down the foods that we eat. So then the foods that we eat gets broken down into these little molecules. So the molecules can provide the nutrients to all our vital organs. Without proper digestive enzymes, those nutrients are not being broken down properly, and our organs are not getting the nutrients that it needs in order for it to thrive. I have patients that actually, and I myself take fulvic acid and also humic acid. We have it in drops. So what I usually do is that adding something like that into your daily routine helps your body detoxify, helps the kidneys and the liver. The kidneys and the liver is really important. Those are the two major organs to help your body eliminate these toxins. They're a natural filtration system that we have in our body that's able to get rid of all these toxins.
Yeah, removing toxins. I know that even humic and fulvic are helpful with healing the gut lining. Have you heard of people using humic and fulvic for gut healing itself?
Yes, what it does is that it actually helps to balance the pH level in our gut. So again, our hydrochloric acid is able to go in there and break down the foods we eat to increase absorption. So it's not how we eat or what we eat, it's what our body's able to absorb.
Are you familiar at all with nitric oxide? Do you have any commentary on nitric oxide?
Yes.
Did you see the right precursors to create nitric oxide in the body in that formula? And do you have any feedback on that?
Nitric oxide is so important because that really helps with not only our cardiovascular system, but it helps with our brain activity too. One of the nitric oxide precursor is what we call L-arginine and L-citrulline. What that does is that it's a precursor to increase our blood vessels. So it helps to vasodilate our blood vessels. So the blood vessels can increase the blood flow throughout the body. And we notice that, and especially in professional athletes, what they do is that they use it for stamina, endurance, and also recovery. It's so important for us to have the right amount of nitric oxide in our body, which helps with the circulation, and it helps with our fatigue as well.
What about L-citrulline and L-arginine? Are you familiar with those precursors to nitric oxide?
L-citrulline actually is a precursor of nitric oxide. It helps to increase that NO to vasodilate the blood vessels and supports cardiovascular health. Also, L-arginine is a precursor of nitric oxide. What it does is that it, again, helps to increase the blood flow, but it helps to increase the stamina and the endurance. What we notice is that when a patient is on niacin, it helps to reduce their cholesterol by increasing the blood flow to certain organs. And we notice that there's a decrease in homocysteine levels, which is a precursor and a panel that we usually run on our cardiovascular patients. So patients whose homocysteine level is above an 8, we usually recommend for them to incorporate some L-citrulline, L-arginine, or even niacin into their daily habits. You know that L-citrulline is like in a watermelon, right? It's the white part of the watermelon.
Huh.
It's the concentrated white part of the watermelon, and that helps. It's kind of like has that Viagra-like effect because the L-citrulline helps to vasodilate the blood vessels, so it increases the blood flow down to the male organ.
Really, for both males and females, or what?
Yeah, both males and female to increase the blood flow down there. So when you eat your watermelon, don't throw the white part. I usually cut it up and dice it up and put it in a salad.
Does it also? I've read about it increasing sensitivity, so people, experience more sensitivity, which I guess is a good thing. Some people want to experience less sensitivity, so that's a multi-billion-dollar market there where people are trying to lessen their sensitivity as well.
But because it vasodilates, it opens up those blood vessels. So when we talk about male sexual health, they think it's, it's like, oh, it's ED, erectile dysfunction. Of course, they pop like a Viagra or Cialis. What does it do? It increases the blood flow, but it's a Band-Aid effect. What is it doing to your cardiovascular system? If you're having erectile dysfunction, why not look at the cardiovascular system and say, what else is going on in my heart? So what we want to do is that instead of just saying, hey, here's the Viagra, here's the Cialis, why don't we add in like vitamin B3, niacin, L-citrulline, and L-arginine to increase that blood flow more naturally. Eat foods that are rich in that, like watermelon, beets, to increase that niacin.
That's great. And so then, again, looking at this protocol of probiotics, looking at digestive enzymes, in there we've got a pre, pro, and postbiotic. Any commentary on digestive enzymes, why they're helpful? We've included them here, but we've also put together with it a pre, pro, and postbiotic.
So when we talk about digestive enzymes, it's so important for our body to have the adequate amount of digestive enzymes to break down the foods that we eat. We need to change the foods into nutrients so it can be readily absorbed inside the body. So when we eat, our gut health, our intestinal tract is supposed to produce what we call hydrochloric acid. With the right amount of hydrochloric acid, it helps the body break down that food into nutrients. So by taking digestive enzymes that has protease, lipase, and amylase, what it does is that the protease helps to break down the protein. The amylase helps to break down the carbohydrates, and the lipase helps to break down the fats. Why do we need digestive enzymes? As our body starts to age, what happens is that our body's ability to break down the food starts to decrease. So food absorption does not occur like the way it should when we're younger. However, when we have symptoms like bloating, gas, and acid reflux, it's important for us to get that adequate amount of digestive enzymes so that our body is able to absorb all that good food that we're eating.
And the pre-pro postbiotics?
Prebiotics is really important because they are one of those probiotics that helps for your intestinal tract, especially the large intestine, to what we call the bulk of our elimination, the bulk of our feces. When we have the adequate amount of the prebiotics, it allows our gut flora, a microbiome, to multiply in a healthy gut. So we have the bad microbiome and the good, healthy microbiome. So it's important for us to have the good microbiome higher than the bad microbiome. By eating foods that are rich in prebiotics helps our body break that down. But sometimes when we're exposed to toxins or when we're exposed to antibiotics, medication, stress, chronic stress can actually decrease that prebiotics, so it distorts the ratio between the pre and the probiotic. And taking supplementation that has a probiotic helps with the small intestine to absorb the nutrients that your body needs. So with a probiotic that has a multi-strand in it, helps the body to break down and your gut lining to heal a lot better so your body can function properly and deliver those nutrients to the vital organs. Especially our neurotransmitters is formed in our gut. Neurotransmitters such as GABA, serotonin, and also dopamine is essential for our brain function, and having that right microbiome allows those neurotransmitters to signal more optimally, so then patients that have depression, anxiety, or even ADHD is able to cope with life a lot better if the microbiome is healthier.
if you have, from whatever source, spike protein, whether it's infection or vaccine, being able to infect bacteria and be produced at a constant rate, your biggest challenge is firstly, how do you get it out of the body? Okay? And so it's not just about neutralizing toxins, it's about getting rid of bacteria or the source of these fragments that are leading to toxin production. Without that piece of the puzzle, if you can't completely eliminate it, you will then always be chasing your tail to try and find mechanisms to be able to try and handle and manage this. And this is where now, in terms of long COVID, I've been spending a lot of time thinking, reflecting, researching, and it is extremely complex because it's not just about the toxin. It's also about the fact that the toxins not only make the body sick, but they also kill other bacteria, the good bacteria that we need. How do we fix that? I mean, it's extremely complex. So far, what I've learned looking at long COVID is everything works, but nothing works. So meaning that some people may benefit from one kind of therapy. It's the hardest part is trying to work out which people benefit from what. Well, my rule is simple in science. If something works, I just want to know what the mechanism is, because the mechanism that worked for that is likely to open the door to other things that can work in a similar mechanism. So from a scientific point of view, yeah, anything that works, if it works and it makes a patient better, my interest is how does it work? Why does it work? What is the mechanism that causes it to work? And then once I've grasped that, you can then think about other things that could work in a similar way. So as I said, what I have learned is that the body is fearfully and wonderfully made. And so I never think that there is anything that cannot work. And I never think that our scientific understanding has reached the limit. So anything that could be of value, even from a homeopathic point of view, I've learned to respect that. Don't fully understand all the mechanisms, but I can see the power of the ability of water to retain memory. So once you analyze and you look at those things and you recognize that the body is 66% water, then yes, all of these things have a place. And I think that this is going to be the lesson coming out of COVID, is that it is time for us to step beyond just a simple pharmaceutical pathological model and start looking at disease and health in a much broader way than we have. So as I have said quite often with long COVID, everything works and nothing works. Okay? So as I looked at it, my aim has always been to find primary pathophysiology. Okay? That means that what is the fundamental disease process that is occurring that needs to be addressed. So when I look at that framework, what I have found is that it seems as though the most significant abnormality that occurs across the board, whether from infection or vaccination, is that there seems to be a targeting of the immune system specifically at T cells. Okay, so the T cell immune system gets dysregulated. What I've said to patients is that if you have a predisposition in terms of inflammatory disease, it doesn't matter where. It could be in your throat, in your gut, in your prostate. It could be endometrial. If there is inflammation and you have a dysregulation of that, you could end up with a flare-up of disease. Now, this is where you have to break it down into sections. The issue around toxins has to be gut-related, primarily. I shouldn't say necessarily completely, but primarily gut, upper airway sinuses, and lungs, and possibly prostate. Okay, wherever you have bacteria, if you have an aggregation of bacteria that can therefore produce toxins and allow it to get inside the bloodstream, you could then get toxin-related symptoms. So in the context of toxin-related symptoms, depending on which bacterial genus is producing the toxin will probably determine which toxins are being produced. Then it also depends on that individual's capacity to neutralize a particular toxin. When you put the two things together, this is why I see such a variation in symptoms and presentations for patients. So you may find that some people who may have a specific kind of toxin that is targeting the nicotine receptors, in those patients, nicotine blockers work. But if you have another patient where it's primarily targeting the muscarinic, say for instance, receptors, or it's primarily targeting the opioid receptors, naltrexone may work better. And so it's this kind of analysis and understanding the characteristics of each patient that allows us to have a toolbox that will help them to be able to manage the symptoms. But critically, whenever you're using anything like that, you're managing symptoms. You haven't dealt with the primary problem, because it means you will continually have to use these therapies because your fundamental issue is still in place, which is the production of toxins. That still has to be addressed. So the first thing that I would do, and it's very difficult for patients, is that they have to first take responsibility for their lifestyle. Meaning, a lot of people are sensitive to particular foods, and that sensitivity drives an immune response, and that immune response can damage either their gut or even their upper airway. If that is not addressed, if you are lactose intolerant and you still continue to drink milk, and the milk continues to drive the immune response in your gut that causes a leaky gut, there is no therapy that will fix you if you don't stop drinking milk. Does that make sense? So for each person, I usually say you have got to fix your gut. That's the easiest, not easy I should say, the most important thing to deal with and address. Do not accept bloating, do not accept constipation, do not accept diarrhea. If your gut indicates to you that there is a problem, don't eat it. As simple as that. Then you have to give your gut time to heal. And it's like a burn. It doesn't heal overnight. Could take weeks, couple of months. When your immune system has settled and your gut is no longer leaky, even if there are toxins being produced in the gut, it can't get through to then cause disease. And that's the way that I'm saying, is that fundamentally you have to go back to fixing any kind of immune disturbance that was present in order to reduce the risk of ongoing issues. As I said, my research has been focused on ACE2. And ACE2 is an essential part of what we call the renin-angiotensin system. Many people with hypertension will be using drugs like ACE inhibitors. And essentially all they're doing is that the body produces a sequence of proteins with enzymes, so it produces angiotensinogen, then to angiotensin 1, and then angiotensin 2. And each step of that pathway uses a different enzyme. So angiotensin 1 is converted to angiotensin 2 by angiotensin converting enzyme. Nice and simple. The angiotensin 2 that is produced can have the effect of increasing inflammation and pushing up blood pressure. So because we've known that, for many years we have used the ACE inhibitors that block angiotensin converting enzyme, so we reduce the amount of angiotensin 2 and therefore reduce blood pressure. Nice and simple. When you then take this into the context of autoimmunity, if there is an autoimmune response targeting ACE2, ACE2 does the job of neutralizing angiotensin 2. The way how the body works is always balance. So you could consider angiotensin converting enzyme as the biceps and angiotensin converting enzyme 2 as the triceps. They work in balance. So if you weaken the triceps and you have the biceps too strong, you can't function effectively. And that's essentially what I am concerned about, that the antibody response to ACE2 will then lead to higher levels of angiotensin 2, which leads to hypertension. The hypertension can affect the whole body, but where most of it is concentrated is in the lungs, in the lung blood vessels. That's where most of this work happens. And so if you have high levels of angiotensin 2, what then happens is that the pressures inside the lung blood vessels, so to put it in context, the blood pumps from the right-hand side of the heart. It gets all the venous blood. It pumps it through the lungs to get oxygen. The oxygenated blood comes back to the left-hand side of the heart and then gets pumped around the body. In pulmonary hypertension, the pressures are too high in the blood vessels in the lung, and so it's struggling to push it through the lungs, and therefore that leads to disease primarily characterized by shortness of breath and underlying heart issues. And so that's the pulmonary hypertension, but the same principle applies with regards to hypertension generally in the body. So I'm expecting that to escalate significantly over the next 5 to 10 years. And if we don't look for it, we will then reap all the long-term effects of uncontrolled hypertension, brain disease, heart disease, kidney disease, eye disease. These are all things that we know, which is why we have always been targeting and mitigating hypertension. So that's been my focus, to try and raise awareness that we need to understand more the risks going forward so that we can try and mitigate it. Dementia was my passion, or is my passion. It hasn't changed really. It's just that COVID has dominated my research for the past 3 years. So, as I explained before, my mum had dementia, and she died in 2008. And I felt very helpless. And that drove me to think that I had got to find a way to help others in a way I couldn't help my mother. So that's what drove me to research dementia. So it's a personal journey, more so than a medical or job-related journey. And so my approach was always to find the primary pathophysiology. And my approach to dementia is again simple. I just asked a simple question. What is the characteristic of all forms of dementia? Meaning that we talk about Alzheimer's and we talk about amyloid, but you can also get Parkinson's dementia, and that's alpha-synuclein. It's a completely different protein. You can get vascular dementia. You can get dementia related to multiple sclerosis. You can get dementia related to an infection. So what is the primary connecting factor for all forms of dementia? And essentially my research led me to technically dementia is a mitochondrial disease. As long as you understand that, you will then understand how to approach the management and potentially the treatment of it. If you understand that the brain or neurons have the highest concentration of mitochondria, not the highest, but one of the highest, so comparatively thousands of mitochondria in a neuron compared to a normal cell. If those mitochondria get damaged by any cause, you will eventually get dementia. Now, dementia people think is just about damage to neurons. No, dementia is specifically damage to acetylcholine neurons. That's really what causes the dementia. So the question should be, why are acetylcholine neurons in the brain primarily affected in dementia to cause the memory and the cognitive issues associated with it. And it's very simple. Mitochondria are the central part. Acetylcholine is the only neurotransmitter that requires a portion of it to be made in the mitochondria. Every other neurotransmitter is a peptide. And so therefore, if you have a depletion of mitochondria, you can't adequately produce enough acetylcholine. Simple as. And so therefore, that will be your first layer that will go, and that's why we notice those symptoms. If we left people to live another 50 years, you would find multiple other things that could happen. But in terms of the initial or the primary neurotransmitter that gets depleted, if you have mitochondrial disease, it will be acetylcholine. I have developed what I think are specific strategies that can work in the context of dementia. But again, nothing is ever, there's very rarely a disease that you just use one drug for and suddenly people are better. There are layers that have to be dealt with. And so I should finish the book that I did. I did a book called Dementia Simplified, which was detailing a lot of the concepts around this. And the principles are, one, you need to optimize the gut. You always start with the gut. You don't accept constipation. You make sure the bowel is not overloaded. You make sure that there is no leaky gut. And that's your baseline. You look at the diet. There's no point trying to treat dementia in somebody who is drinking 4 bottles of wine a week. The alcohol is toxic to the brain. That's their problem. Does that make sense? So the lifestyle has to be addressed. You have to look for specific neurotoxins. Many people underestimate the impact of artificial sweeteners. In people who have neurological problems, if you use them, it will exacerbate it. So this is where the lifestyle comes in. Once you have dealt with those factors and you have replaced the nutrition, and you've started to replace the nutrition by giving the body enough energy and resources, and that's where things like the ketogenic diet can help. It doesn't reverse dementia. It just happens to make the brain a little bit more efficient. Your job subsequently to protect the brain is then to protect the mitochondria. And that's the technique that I've been looking at. I've seen it in close relatives. I haven't been able to roll this out as yet to significant numbers of patients. But I have seen the impact of gradually reversing that cognitive decline and stabilizing it. And the way that you look for that is when they start to gain weight. When the frail person with dementia starts to put back on weight, that indicates that you have largely stabilized the energy utilization in the brain. I do have a faith, and that faith is primarily what drives me with what I do. Within that, my faith tells me that the world needs to transition. Where we are now and how we are operating is not sustainable to bringing the whole world forward. So from a faith point of view, I believe that the human race is here not just for itself. It's here for a purpose. It has to be here for its maker. The point is that in order for the world to progress, we need, as individuals, to have a better understanding of our role in the whole process of spiritual life, beyond just what we are living here. If you don't understand the principles of what comes next, it's very hard to make sense. I use a simple analogy. I use the analogy of a baby in the womb. Imagine you could speak to that baby in the womb, and you're saying to that baby, listen, you know that one day you're going to be born. It's going to be very frightening. You're going to be squeezed. There's going to be a lot of blood, a lot of screaming. You're going to be crying. But when you come out of the other side, you are going to be able to eat. The baby doesn't eat in the womb, so he doesn't know what you're talking about. You'd be able to breathe. The baby doesn't breathe in the womb, so he doesn't know what you're talking about. The concepts of that baby can't quite grasp what is beyond. In the same way for us, we can't grasp what is beyond. You would tell the baby that actually, when this frightening thing happens, their life is not ending, it's only just beginning. That's eternity.
Next up, we have Dr. Tom Lewis, who discusses the Epstein-Barr virus and its potential role in chronic health issues. He highlights that while many people have been exposed to EBV, the levels of antibodies can vary significantly among individuals, suggesting a chronic component to the virus. Dr. Lewis emphasizes that chronic EBV may contribute to various health problems, including chronic fatigue and brain-related syndromes. Dr. Lewis recommends improving immunity as a defense against chronic infections and provides insights into 5 mechanisms for enhancing immunity. He also shares a treatment approach for EBV involving a step-by-step reduction in antibody titers through multiple treatments.
Epstein-Barr is one of many what I call usual suspect viruses. And I will tell you that I have bona fide data that shows that we are able to substantially reduce the burden of Epstein-Barr and show that the individual of having that treatment shows remarkable improvement. And the main thing that Epstein-Barr does, most traditional doctors, let's say all traditional doctors, are going to say that we've all been exposed to Epstein-Barr. So if I run a lab panel and I run what's called an immunoglobulin IgG, we're all positive for that. But why would my level be like 300, someone else be greater than 600? Is it really the fact that we've had it in the past and someone had it a more furious version? Or could it be that there actually is a chronic component to Epstein-Barr? And I pose it that we absolutely, many people out there with particularly chronic fatigue and any number of brain and other syndromes have what I call chronic Epstein-Barr. Now, Epstein-Barr is almost never the single organism that someone's exposed to. They have, if they're vulnerable to, say, Epstein-Barr from a chronic perspective, they can have parasites, they can have stealth bacteria, and they can have any number of other chronic or what I call subacute virals like cytomegalovirus, HSV. There's a whole host of viruses out there. Even in the case of Robert Kennedy Jr., I believe that the dystonia he has is probably instigated by some type of viral, if not Epstein-Barr, other usual suspects. So the methodology, if you listen to what the top immunologist in the world, Gert Van der Bosch, says about viruses, we learned a lot, and I think it was a great educational platform, despite all the misery and unnecessary deaths, that we learned about disease, especially infectious disease, from the whole experience. And what Van der Bosch says is that, one person dies, another person has mild symptoms. So should we be focusing on the virus, or should we be focusing on human health? And that's really the critical factor. Now, it's not about always just comorbidities, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, things like that. With these subacute infections, when they're in the chronic phase, I always tell folks that, traditional doctors are fighting the redcoats. It's very obvious. You have a high fever, you feel sick, you're not going to work, or because you feel that lousy, and it's very clear you have the flu, cold, something of that nature. But with these subacute or stealth chronic infections, it's insidious. You can get very low-grade symptoms, and then they may mitigate, Why? Because you reduce stress in your life, or you know, it's summertime and you're getting more vitamin D and sunshine exposure, things of that nature. So it's not as predictable, not as easily discerned as, you know, an acute syndrome. But the work of folks like Charles Stratton out of Vanderbilt show very clearly that these organisms can morph into multiple forms, some of which completely evade immunity, but are also not pathogenic in that form. But then they can morph back in when they see, I call them opportunistic. So traditional medicine is fighting the redcoats. They're marching down the lane, and the Minutemen are picking them off as they're hiding behind trees while the redcoats are in marching order and making all kinds of noise. So your best defense is to start off with, you know, fixing and improving your immunity. And I look at 5 mechanisms. So let's look at, I'm going to give you some specific treatment ideas on Epstein-Barr that have worked for me, and I've proven it through repeated labs, seeing. So here's an example of where medicine gets it wrong. If you have Epstein-Barr at a very high level, and I'm talking about an IgG immunoglobulin, not even IgM, which is considered active form. IgG is considered historic or past. It's not true. It's chronic, and I've written a paper that gives great detail on this. But if you go from someone, give you an example of a young lady, 36 years old, real bad fatigue, greater than 600 titer, antibody titer for Epstein-Barr. Treatment number 1 brought her down to 350. Treatment number 2 brought her down to 175. And at 175, it's low enough that really her fatigue, her change in fatigue was quote-unquote life-changing for her. So myself with my partner, Dr. Michael Carter, is an MD, developed the concept of the hierarchy of health. Okay, and the hierarchy of health is a very simple concept. You're building a house. What's more important, the windows or the foundation? And obviously it's the foundation. So we look at things very methodically from a systems approach. We call as we go down the list from the foundation to the studs to the windows, these are what we call dependent variables. And we want to start at the most important dependent variable and work our way down. What is the most important dependent variable? Gut health. Extremely important. So the first thing we do is, what I do in my program, is simulate a fecal transplant without doing a fecal transplant. What's the difference between a fecal transplant and a probiotic? They both have organisms, but donated poop from healthy individuals have a huge cross-section of unique species. Whereas probiotics, so we have great breadth. Whereas probiotics tend to have a narrow range of species. Some of them may be keystone species that are very important, but we need all of them. That's why the fecal transplants are miraculous with people like, they're on death's door from Clostridium difficile. So a probiotic will tend to have a very narrow range of species, but a lot of so-called colony-forming units. Now, many, many moons ago, there was scuttlebutt that probiotics didn't work. And in some respects, I can understand how that conclusion was drawn, because if you're giving a probiotic to someone who's lost some of the integrity of their microbiome, their environment or their terrain in the gut for the formation of colonies, CFUs, is not very good. It's an inhospitable environment. And so what I've learned over time is that when you give probiotics, it's not just about prebiotics, which are the food, but like we survive, we need food, but we also need air and water, oxygen and water. So we need to provide those types of constituents when we take a probiotic. And I have a number of supplements that, I don't sell, but recommend, that have some of those constituents. So, for example, you want some betaine hydrochloride, because I think the acid is the most important thing that allows the beneficial organisms of the microbiome to survive and replicate. How do I know this? Well, if you look at Helicobacter pylori, Nobel Prize in Medicine, I think it was the year 2005, for the relationship by Warren and Marshall, Australian pathologists, the relationship between H. pylori levels and stomach ulcers. But what we've learned beyond their work is that Helicobacter pylori is a pathogen in the gut, and what it does is it releases an enzyme that converts nitrogen compounds into ammonia. What is ammonia? It's an antacid. Why does it release an antacid? Because it knows, it's all about survival, it knows that the beneficial organisms of the microbiome prefer strong acid, so Helicobacter pylori has adapted to low acid, which is disadvantageous for the good microbiome. That's the ammonia. So if you have Helicobacter pylori in your gut, you basically are on an antacid, and that's not something you want. So it's really important that when you take a probiotic, fermented food, whatever, and you have any kind of gut dysbiosis, I don't care if it's just a little rumbly in the tumbly, or some excess gas, or a little GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, heartburn, eroding teeth, Barrett's, whatever, diarrhea, constipation, then probiotics are really, really important, because you are not what you eat, you are what you absorb. That's why probiotics are at the top of the health hierarchy, really. But you need the prebiotics, vegetables, or complex carbohydrates that are the food for the probiotics. But you also have to have the oxygen and the water. And so I look at supporting supplements to go along with taking probiotics, which would include bile salts, bile acid salts, betaine hydrochloride, and digestive enzymes. Now, none of these last three I mentioned, I think you need to take if you're a really, really healthy individual you can assert that your gut is highly optimal because you're producing those. There's a whole communication network down there. Karen Kirshner from Microbiome Labs says that when you have that Pavlovian food response, the first thing you do is, create saliva. That's actually a signal to start releasing acid and enzymes and all that stuff. So you should be able to manufacture that appropriately. But when you have dysbiosis, you're probably not that efficient at it, and your microbiome deficient as well. So you need to support that. So it's a lot of discussion about something that appears to have nothing to do with treating Epstein-Barr. But if we cannot support basic immunity with high-level nutrients to repair damage, but also support the immune cells, then we're off to a bad start, and any treatment or intervention we do is going to have to be much more vigorous and aggressive to address the Epstein-Barr. So we always look at treatments as being, adjuvant or supportive of immunity, because we have a fabulous immune system. Now, of course, pathogens have developed fabulous mechanisms and machinery to overcome that. So it's all that struggle. But so the next thing I do is look at some things, other pathogens other than Epstein-Barr that could very well be present, which is tying up bandwidth of our immunity. So let's assume we're eating well, we're eating clean, we're drinking plenty of water, we're getting sunshine, we're taking our vitamin D, our gut's in great shape, okay, but we could have some historic infections. Look at herpes zoster with shingles, but there's any number of organisms I can assert to you that there are many, many organisms that we've been exposed to that are in a spore or latent form. And one of the biggest sources of that, which happen to be very aggressive, are spirochetes. So spirochetes are a pathogenic bacteria, spiral shape, can literally drill into cells, and then when the organism gets inside the cell, intracellular, not extracellular like the flu or the coronavirus or the cold, that what they do is they look upon your mitochondria, your energy generating platform of taking carbohydrates and oxygen and converting them into carbon dioxide and water. There's what's called the electron transport chain along that pathway of the Krebs cycle. So the pathogens get inside the cells, and they're literally at the electron buffet table, and robbing energy from you. Okay, one for them, two for you, maybe two for them, one for you. What does that do in terms of energy health? You know, your brain, which is extremely metabolically active. So we need to look at other, what I call usual suspects. And Dr. Carter and I did a project at a Fortune 1000 company about a decade ago where we had people with whole range of ailments, from Parkinson's to migraines to fibromyalgia to ineffective at losing weight, getting ready for a wedding, all those kinds of things. And what we ran is we ran bacterial and viral titers, including HSV 1-2, Epstein-Barr, and then what we call usual suspects. So spirochetes, how you test for spirochetes is you do a Lyme blot. So Lyme is a town in Connecticut. It was where there was an association made in terms of the discovery of tick bites, Borrelia burgdorferi, Babesia as spirochetal infections, and acute disease from Lyme disease. Of course, there's a chronic phase as well, Lyme brain, things like that. So tick bites are not the only source for Lyme syndrome, that being spirochetal infection. And if you have a spirochetal infection, it's very aggressive against eyes, brain, but particularly the vascular system. And so any heart arrhythmias, elevated blood pressure, elevated heart rate, tachycardia, it's a good idea to look at, do I have a spirochete? So if you've been bitten by a tick, but in my humble opinion, based on the research I've done, is the number one source of spirochetal infection is from the mouth. Cavitations from a wisdom tooth being removed, but more particularly from root canals. And we do an oral DNA test, which looks for 11 usual suspects, including Treponema denticola, which is a spirochetal infection. So we need to look at that, and we need to ameliorate that. And we can treat systemically. No one wants it because it's an antibiotic treatment, but if you want to save your heart or your brain, Judith McCloskey in Switzerland, MD, PhD, showed that spirochetes lead to Alzheimer's. So, but really, what we want to do is we want to do source reduction. That is, see a biological dentist, get appropriate treatments for the mouth. One of my favorite treatments is a chlorine dioxide product that is specifically designed for treating pathogens of the mouth. It's called deoxyrinse. But we need to evaluate those root canals, potentially remove them, that's the best, and replace them with an implant. The implant does not, even though it's dead, just like a root canal tooth is, the root canals have miles and miles and miles of microtubules where infection can hang out. They're literally hobos that hang out there and can come out and tactically attack your body, particularly intracellularly, and rob electrons from you. They live in biofilms. So that means they're lipophilic. So that means not treating your fictitious cholesterol, total cholesterol number, with a drug is extremely important. Even with something like niacin or red yeast rice, you don't want to mess with your lipids, because lipids play an extremely important role in your body as part of your immune system and part of a repair and recovery mechanism. So now that I've led into that with a lot of discussion, let's talk specifically about how to treat Epstein-Barr. Well, first of all, there's nothing super specific for Epstein-Barr. The antivirals tend to be broad-based. That's a good thing. But there are treatments that are actually very effective at lowering it. So the first thing is recognizing that if you have an Epstein-Barr IgG titer, it's not historic, it's chronic, it's real, and we can lower that, and there's no question about it. So the first thing I do in terms of treatment is I'll put people on a combination long-term, particularly if their titer is very high, of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. And hydroxychloroquine, I think, is 200 milligrams twice a day. I don't want to give medical advice here, but that's what the label usually says when you get it prescribed. And the ivermectin can be done once, or depending on how bad it is, like Corey from FLCCC said during COVID, double the dose. But it's usually your weight divided by 11 in milligrams once a day, but maybe twice would be called for. And then the next thing we do is Dr. David Brownstein, ozone expert, iodine expert. We call it the Brownstein Protocol, though he gave credit for this protocol to someone else, the gentleman's name I can't recall at the moment. But we do the Brownstein Protocol 4 days every month continuously, while you have the ivermectin hydroxychloroquine as a baseline treatment. What I found over time with ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine is it's much more effective as a preventative than it is as a treatment, but it has some efficacy. And of course, the best preventative is mouth sprays, nasal sprays, barrier immunity, betaine hydrochloride for your gut. If your gut's in dysbiosis, that's something that's often missed in terms of barrier immunity recommendations. If your gut's in dysbiosis, you don't have strong acid. If you don't have strong acid, organisms can come in and take hold. You know, it's a fine line between living and then just something that's a string of protein. But see, when you have strong acid, that's how you break up a protein into basic amino acids. You've got to do the same with a virus or other pathogens. So you need to have the strong acid. So anyway, that's the barrier immunity. But what is the Brownstein protocol? So once again, it's a 4-day protocol where we're using extraordinarily high doses of 4 different nutrients: vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin A, and iodine. And I've written a book with an explanation on iodine as a deficiency, and there's debate from Isabella Wentz, 150 micrograms, to David Brownstein, 50 milligrams. Huge variation. But the one common denominator between all these folks, Chris Kresser, folks like that, is selenium plays an adjuvant role in the activity of iodine in and outside of the thyroid. So it's a really important thing. So what exactly is the dosing? And you want to take them all together. What I tell people, if you haven't done high-dose iodine, 25, 50, as Dr. Brownstein says, if you're really sick, you go to a higher dose, up high as 100 milligrams, not micrograms, 100 milligrams. The RDA is 150 micrograms. But what I'd like you to do with the first time you go in and execute this protocol is you titrate up from low iodine to the dose you're probably looking at. And for myself, I do this occasionally as a prophylactic, 25 milligrams of iodine. And I use a mixture, I use a product called iThyroid. It's a mixture of iodine and iodide. So it's a mixture. And our body knows how to manage between the two. That's why we need to consume food for energy, so our body can do these fancy conversions, so we don't have to say, how much iodine versus iodide do I need? The body will take care of that. But so you titrate up slowly to see if you tolerate the iodine. And some people flush a little bit. Some people, it may affect the thyroid and they feel an energy issue, or they may, have a little elevated heart rate. But during this treatment, I don't worry about where my thyroid-stimulating hormone goes. That's subordinate to getting rid of the Epstein-Barr. We think it's the thyroid that's causing the energy problem. Probably not. It's probably Epstein-Barr. Much higher probability that it's these electron stealers that are taking your energy away from you and causing any variety of disease, like I said, from dystonia, neurological conditions, neuromuscular, Alzheimer's, all these things. So now that we're titrated up on iodine, then we start the 4-day program. And what I suggest people do is, for bookkeeping, the beginning of every month, particularly if you have, sleep issues, energy issues, chronic pain, just general malaise, do this protocol. But very importantly, test for Epstein-Barr and other viruses, which we do. Be very happy to run labs on you and track how we're doing. But since it's vitamins and nutrients, if you have general fatigue, I would do the Brownstein protocol. Okay, and I would do it more than once. So at the beginning of the month, you're taking vitamin D, 50,000 IU, 4 days in a row. But alongside that, altogether, you're taking 100,000 IU of vitamin A, 8 to 10 grams of vitamin C, which can be spread out during the day, and 25 to 100 milligrams of iodine. And you do that for 4 days, and then you take the rest of the month off. Now, it's really a brilliant protocol that Dr. Brownstein has adopted. He never used ivermectin hydroxychloroquine to treat his COVID patients. He used this protocol. He didn't lose a single patient. And so it's a very strong antiviral. And what we now know with turbo cancer and all this stuff, cancer, Dr. Carter and I wrote a book, Is Cancer an Infectious Disease? And the answer is 100% yes. Is it only an infectious disease? No. But these organisms play a key role in that pathogenesis, that etiology. So you're going to run this. So here's the history. Cod liver oil. You know, we think vitamin D is the ultimate immune booster. Okay, but so much of the research is trying to isolate the action of one thing and thinking that it's panacea. Like I mentioned before, you need to have the selenium to partner up with the iodine. We understand that for calcium balance, you need vitamin D, K2, magnesium. The same is true with any antiviral treatment. We need to partner up, and you'll get more than just an additive benefit. You'll get a multiplicative or factorial benefit, as we call it. But so the studies on cod liver oil, there's one very famous one in British hospitals in the 1800s, 1848 to be precise, where there was an epidemic of tuberculosis, and they call tuberculosis when you're hospitalized and you're coughing up blood near death. They call that consumption. Okay, and what they were giving people, Thomas Percival, famous MD that was in charge of the study, they were giving people between 15 and 120 grams of cod liver oil. So a shot glass, an ounce, is 32 grams. So they were giving, up to 4 full shot glasses of cod liver oil every day to these patients. And they were showing, not super miraculous, but they were going from 8% survival to 12% survival. See, the statistics always get gamed. So that's a 50% relative improvement in mortality, a 4% absolute improvement. But in the context of pharmaceutical drugs, that 50% relative reduction in mortality is phenomenal. And what did it? Was it the vitamin D? Was it the vitamin A in cod liver oil, the vitamin E, the vitamin K? See, the cod liver oil, fish oils. The liver is fish oil on steroids because it has a much higher percentage of the fat-soluble nutrients. So in fact, I believe it was a combination of vitamin A and vitamin D together. And of course, vitamin C, Paul Merrick showed you give high-dose IV vitamin C to people with sepsis, bacterial infection. And they don't die in the hospital. They don't even have to go, they get released from the hospital. So this Brownstein protocol with the iodine, antiseptic, the vitamin A, the vitamin D, the vitamin C is truly a pleiotropic in terms of, treating a range of pathogens. But I have really good data on folks that I put on this protocol, and we see a significant diminution in the Epstein-Barr antibody titers as well as symptoms. And the last thing I'll say about vitamin A is I believe it's the most important natural anti-infectant. We have the essential oils, oregano oil, we have vitamin D, but vitamin A in isolation, I think, is the strongest of the group. And let me give you an example. Alfred Summers, Dean of Johns Hopkins, he's an ophthalmologist. So today, 2023, but in the 1970s and 80s, he conducted a program starting in Indonesia and then spreading to Africa, of trying to prevent early childhood blindness in third world children. And so they were giving a meager 3 cents. That's what the headline says if you look it up on Brave, vitamin A, and it was staving off childhood blindness. But what they showed over time, it was staving off early childhood mortality. And you know, in the 1840s in the United States, 42% of children didn't make it to age 6, and they're always dying of something infectious. So vitamin A and 3 cents was probably, you know, a reasonably good dose, probably 25,000 IU, something like that. I'm not really sure because it's hard to tell what the price and dosing was way back when. But to this day, vitamin A is extraordinarily inexpensive. 25,000 IU you take 4 of during the Rothenstein protocol. And the important thing is it is derived from fish liver oil. It's not beta-carotene. It's the mixture that nature creates for it. So the point is, if you're saving lives, young lives, just by giving vitamin A, it just goes to show. And these people are in the sun, so they're getting plenty of vitamin D. So now we have the mixture. So it's probably the mixture once again. But you give them vitamin A, that's the one-off thing that was the differentiator. And you're fighting any number of infectious diseases prevalent in the third world. So imagine what it can do for you, you know, with some Epstein-Barr and some fatigue in a first world environment, as long as you're taking care of your microbiome, taking care of your mouth, eating clean, getting some exercise, getting sunshine. So that's my long lead-in to what I'm doing with Epstein-Barr. And, you know, we're not doing any pharmacological interventions, although if you have bacterial infection, we will. We'll do targeted antibiotics, and not every antibiotic wipes out your gut. We like to say all antibiotics are bad. They're not. Minocycline, for example, doxycycline, do not really have a significant impact on the gut, but have a major impact on, say, spirochetal infections, which, believe me, you don't want to have a spirochetal infection long term. So to summarize, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, if you have very high Epstein-Barr antibody titers. If it's lower, then you probably don't have to do that as a baseline. And then the Rothenstein protocol, 100,000 vitamin A, 50,000 vitamin D, 8 to 10 grams of vitamin C, iodine with selenium, with the iodine up to as high as 25 to 100 milligrams. And then you don't escalate the selenium, you just take whatever your doctor prescribes is necessary for selenium. And I believe it's 200 micrograms. Don't get confused. Micro, MCG versus MG, 1,000-fold difference. You know, a factor of 1,000 difference. So be very careful not to overdose yourself with selenium.
To conclude this episode, we have Dr. Lee Merritt, who explores the potential link between parasites and health issues, particularly in the context of vaccines and immune system suppression. She highlights the often overlooked concern of accumulating parasites over a lifetime, especially when the immune system is strong, forming cysts. Dr. Merritt raises concerns about factors like diet, aging, and getting jabbed that may weaken the immune system, allowing parasites to become active and potentially leading to health problems, including inflammatory diseases and cancer.
What I see happening is that they're using our bodies against us in ways that they've misled us over the generations. So, for example, one of the big problems I keep mentioning is parasites. If they know we are riddled with parasites, but we don't know that, then they can release those parasites like a time bomb. And they can do that by damaging our immune system. The way parasites work in the body is we all get them. And we were told, unfortunately, in American medical schools that we didn't need to deal with them because those were third world country problems. But that's not true. One of the factoids I remember from medical school is that you're more at risk of having MS if you had a lap dog before the age of 5. And I remembered it because I thought that's such a funny fact. Why would that have anything to do with a neurologic disease, having a dog when you were 4 years old? Well, it's because Look at little kids. They get licked on the face by the dogs, and dogs have parasites. But they never treat, in America today, we used to, but not today, we don't treat children for parasites.
You're more likely to treat the dog for the parasites.
Yeah, you might treat the dog. And why? If you think the dog has parasites, so do humans. And so the bottom line here is we purposely were misled about the parasites so that they've been building up in generations of us, and we've gone untreated. We haven't been paying attention to a major health threat. And that can't be by accident. And now they come along with ways of dumbing down our immune system in such a way that allows the parasites to become active. So what happens in the body is you accumulate parasites over a lifetime, and your body, it walls them off into little cysts. And as you're young and your parasites you're young and your immune system is very good, it keeps the parasites in those cysts in check. But if something happens to you that causes your immune system to go down, either you've got bad diet, you get older, older people have problems that you don't have when you're young. Why do we get inflammatory diseases in the 40s and 50s and cancer in the 40s and 50s and on? Because all of these things are parasite related. And what happens is now in this, one of the things we observed in this vaccine nightmare is that these young military guys that were perfectly healthy take the vaccine and they show up not just with one solitary cancer, but showered with mets all over. That's been told to me by several doctors in the military.
Mets?
Mets, metastases. In other words, they've got cancer. They don't show up. It used to be in the old days. When I was in the military, you might see a young guy, and young guys would get testicular cancer or, skin cancer, something. It'd be a single cancerous lesion, okay? But when you show up with these things all over you, they just send you home to die because they say, there's nothing we can do. It's already too far advanced. But what's really going on here? Do we really think that in 2021 cancer changed its stripes? That cancer suddenly started doing things we've never seen it do before? Recall that they call it turbo cancer now in these post-vaccinated people? Well, no, cancer didn't change. But if cancer was parasites all along, and that the metastases that we see are actually intracellular small microscopic parasites, and we have lots of reason to believe that now, and the Germans really ran that down and nobody was paying attention years ago. If that's really the case, then what we've done with the vaccine is simply allowed your parasites to kill you.
Wow.
Isn't that evil? And it also fits, by the way, when I call them the Babylonian Mafia, I'm not joking, because their old religion, they have to be honest, okay? So, and they feel like in their belief system too, they have to tell you what they're going to do, but they do it in a way you don't understand. And they also feel like they don't have any debt if they don't kill you directly. So if I tie you up on the floor, for example, and you can't feed yourself, I didn't kill you, you just starved to death. Well, this is the perfect example of that. I didn't kill these people with this vaccine. The vaccine, their parasites killed them. You see, it's creepy, but it's, unfortunately, I believe it's real. And it sounds crazy if you haven't thought about this before, but I challenge anybody to just look around and see the world differently, because parasites are clearly a problem that they went out of their way to subvert us from looking at. And I can tell you from the time I was in medical school till now, they have changed the way we do medicine, and it really benefits not ever finding that. The second thing is toxins. Okay, so what a great scheme to tell us there are all these different transmissible viruses. Now, without getting into the science of this, I'm just going to tell anybody that can read science should go and try and convince themselves about the actual existence of viruses. I always thought, I'm an orthopedic surgeon, it's not my field, I'll let those guys do it. I'm sure the virologists are doing this, until a virologist, Stefan Lanka, stepped forward and said, wait a minute, they don't exist. Let me tell you how I figured this out. It's one of these situations that's internally, if you're within the system and you're internally looking at it, it all fits together in like a jigsaw puzzle, so you think it's true. But when you step out of it, you say, this can't be true. It isn't true. We can't isolate them. Okay, you can't isolate viruses. And here's an example of what I'm telling about and why this is so important. Because if you have an imaginary object, you can do anything you want with it. So what happened with the PCR tests? They claimed that they could take this PCR test, stick it in your nose, and they were doing it in the parking lot. Remember the drive-through testing? Stick it in your nose, wave it about in the air in the parking lot, and then put it in a machine to test it, and it told you yes or no that you had COVID. But let's just see how that test really works. They put 16 bases. Now, your genome, your genetic material, the genetic material of so-called viruses, the genetic material of anything, is made of bases and base pairs. So that's what makes the string of letters that they've digitized to computerize this whole thing. And so, like GCTA, you see those in different sequences, and those each stand for a base, an amino acid headed base. Now, so what they're saying is, I can put 16 bases on a swab stick and stick it up your nose and test for the virus, because those 16 bases are this particular protein on the coronavirus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the spike protein. Right? That all sounds very sciencey and it sounds very consistent. But let's now take the 30,000. Let's step out of the matrix and let's look at it from 30,000 feet. Every human has roughly 3.4 billion base pairs in their genome. Billion. And we were taught by these guys, whether it's true or not, we were taught that viral genes exist within our genes. So we have billions and billions and billions of base pairs, including viral bases in our genome. But you see, it'll never stop until we stop the basis of believing in vaccines. And that's really what this is about. This is about not letting them make up a disease. You know, interestingly, I have 4 generations of medical books in my house. So I thought I would go back, and I was studying how they've proven transmission of airborne viruses, which I'm telling you, they really haven't. But I thought I would have to go back to maybe my father's generation. So, you know, I've got my son, myself, my father, and then a longtime relative from the 1880s. And I thought I would have to go back a few generations to discover that they didn't talk about viruses, but really I only had to go back to my books. It turns out when I was in medical school, when we studied transmission of disease in infectious disease texts, they talked about parasites, not about viruses. So viruses are the mythical object, as John Robison said, that you can use to lead people by the nose.
Hey, it's Jonathan, and thanks so much for joining me in this episode as we learn more about one of the key secrets to a better life, improving gut health. Our gut microbiome is composed of an amazing system that plays a crucial role in many bodily functions, including digestion, immunity, and even your mood. We've learned in this episode that when we heal and support the gut, we are improving so many aspects of our lives, and that if we really want to heal, we should focus on cleaning this system and providing it with the right tools that it needs. When our gut microbiome is healthy, we can digest food and absorb nutrients better and even have a stronger and more efficient immune system. Improving gut health is definitely one of the most important things that you should do to bulletproof your immunity. And when our gut is out of balance, this can lead to a variety of health problems, including autoimmune diseases, allergies, and even mental health conditions.